Hello, and welcome to the Ultimate Strategy Podcast, your go-to podcast for everything strategy. Each week, we'll share a new episode covering a wide range of topics designed to help your business grow. Not only smarter, but also make strategy more approachable and actionable. I'm Davina, Strategy Execution Director at Cascade.
And I'm Laura Blackmore, Head of Strategy Execution. Hello and welcome. We're so excited to have you with us today for today's topic. I think is a pretty good one. And as we're coming up to the end of the year, I think you'll be intrigued by what we have to say. Before we dive in, let me thank today's sponsor, Cascade. Cascade is the #1 strategy execution platform that helps turn visions into reality by working as the strategic brain of your organization. Thousands of businesses around the world use Cascade to plan, execute, and track their strategies in one place, improving efficiency and speeding up decision-making. By successfully executing strategies, Cascade customers are making a huge difference, from deploying life-saving vaccines to engineering the fastest Formula One car. If you want to get your team moving towards your vision in one central platform, check out our website at www.cascade.app. Now, let's get started.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I'm Miriam Leza, and I'm just going to introduce you a little bit to our topic today. As Laura already said, it's a very exciting one because we're approaching the end of the year, and we thought it would be great to do an episode on how to do your year-end reflection. We truly believe that it's so important to step back, especially at the end of the year, and take a moment to reflect. Now, there are several ways to do that, and you can do this in a super structured way or in a pretty quick and dirty way. But we want to leave you today with 5 key questions that everybody can set some time aside and do that with their team. I usually like to think about a year-end reflection in almost like three elements. You can always look at your strategy, your business, have you achieved what you want to achieve? You can look at your processes, especially if you might have introduced a new process, to evaluate the process. How is it going with your teams? And did they implement the processes? And the third element can really be about your people and the engagement, which obviously takes a lot more time if you want to do an engagement survey or anything around that. So today we're going to just cut a little bit through the chase and go right to those 5 key questions that you can ask yourself because we're really close to the end of the year. Davina, why don't you take us through the first question?
Of course. So I think question 1, resonates probably with a lot of the leaders out there and also our team. It's important to celebrate the wins, right? So question 1 is, what were our biggest wins this year? We have to start with the positives whenever reflecting. It's so easy to get bogged down by the things that went wrong, but we've got to ask the question that lets you identify and also celebrate your successes. And wins could include anything, right? Big and small. It could be revenue growth. It could be projects that were completed. It could be a new product launch. It also could be some customer retention strategy or even improvements in your team morale. But it's important to recognize them and celebrate them. And also go deeper, I would argue, ask why those wins happened. And then how do you start to replicate those wins as well? And a good tip that I think is very, very useful is to document the wins. We are so adept at doing risk management, noting down all of the things that might go wrong or that have gone wrong. But actually, we need to keep a log of all of the good things too. So document the wins. They're not just feel-good moments. They actually provide the keys to replicating that success in the future. And an example for this could be a product launch that exceeded expectations, maybe because of a pre-launch marketing campaign, or also some kind of activations that you might have been able to do. So use that as a model for future launches. So celebrate those wins. Don't forget about them, even after the year has passed.
I was just going to jump in on something you said,
of course,
which I thought was really interesting. Like, even if your strategy calendar year isn't actually ending, or even if you've already set the strategy for next year, I think it's such a nice moment in the year just to take stock of where you're at and kind of go into the new year. Like, I don't know about you, but I always see the new year as being like quite transformative. You know, maybe we haven't had a great year, but how do we go into the new year with a new fresh mindset and how we're going to do things differently, like both personally and professionally. But I find it's such a great year, end of the year reflection to say, you know what, I'm actually going to stop doing X and I'm going to start doing Y. So I think it's really nice just to like take stock of the mindset that you're going into the new year, especially if things haven't gone that well. How do you
Cool.
start the new year saying, you know what, now's the moment that we can actually reset and do things differently. And we've talked about numerous times, but definitely in the last episode, we talked about the importance of that reflection and celebrating wins. We just don't do it often enough. So actually using this moment to do that, I think is really important.
And a lot happens in a year too. I think it's easy to forget that. But yeah, I definitely agree. And I like the almost alignment to also your personal life. A lot of people set New Year's resolutions. They'll look back at their year and their life. So I think it goes quite nicely together.
But how do we like talk about the negatives? I think that's like the second question, isn't it? It's like, of course, we can talk about the highlights, but what were the biggest challenges? What did we learn? Probably the year hasn't been without its challenges. I think actually reflecting on them and making sure that you don't repeat the same mistakes, or actually using those setbacks as stepping stones to greater success. So I think what are some tips that you would both leave around talking about the challenges and what to do with them?
First of all, I would also say, I think especially when I run exercises with teams about like what went well and what are your challenges, it's quite interesting because usually 2 to 3 people start with the positives first and they just talk about the positives. And then once you kind of go around the table or the virtual table, person number 4 or 5 usually says something positive and then also says, and this did not work. So it just shows how our natural mindset goes immediately to what did not work well. And that's the focus oftentimes. So I would always encourage to like, okay, appreciate the thinking, but also park it and really focus on the positives first and then take that dedicated time. I think it's super important to talk about the challenges and also to evaluate them and maybe to cluster them potentially, because sometimes it's like more individual frustrations. Sometimes it's truly like a team issue. Sometimes it's a business issue, a process issue. But really like going through it and then also from there, take that step to understand what do we learn from it and what can we actually do better in the next year and make that very actionable. But this takes some time because it's really easy to get into that, oh, this did not work, da-da-da-da-da. So it requires really, whether you have a good facilitator who helps you or you have someone in your team whose strength is to facilitate those sessions, to kind of keep the conversation flowing into that right direction without like stopping those organic thoughts that come up either.
I like that. So like reframe.
Yeah, reframe it, right? Yeah.
It's easy to negatively spiral, I think, too, Miriam, to your point. So you kind of recognize a challenge, and then from there you just get deeper and deeper into what didn't work. And I think you'd rather focus it towards a positive spiral, right? What worked well? Why did it work well? And I think the aspect that you mentioned of almost finding themes or clustering things, I think it's important to be specific with the challenges as well. What caused those challenges? Don't hold on to the fact that they happened. Recognize why, and then prevent that for next year.
Totally. What's another question that we think once you kind of go through the positives and then you go through the challenges? What do we think another good question should be asked?
I think you can have the frame as being negative, but I think this is also still leaning more into that positive, which is where did we fall short on our goals? So I think it forces you to confront, the difficult parts where you didn't actually meet expectations. I think it forces you to actually go back and look at the key metrics that you set yourselves at the beginning of the year or midway through the year, if you optimize them. But I think it also helps, again, using that reframe of, okay, well, what happened? Were we unrealistic? Did our priorities shift? What actually happened? And I think, like you said, you do need a good facilitator, or you do need a good mindset to avoid that blame and actually focus the audience or focus your teams. But I think this can really help you look at the negatives and the positives in a really different way, I think. What would you add to that, do you think?
I think I would also add, from what I've seen just recently in conversations, or in your, I facilitated one of those year-end conversations, and it's very interesting because it's easy to, especially with this question of like, kind of, where did you fall short of your goals, that teams don't really want to admit where they fell short of their goals. And if you think about yourself, nobody really wants to admit it, or you find an excuse or something, or actually this takes longer and this and that. So I would always like caution a little bit of saying, oh, okay, we didn't achieve it, but really, truly, this is going to take more time, and this was the reason for this or that. And that's okay. Oftentimes this is the fact or the reason, but I would also just think about, be honest, say like, no, we actually didn't achieve that. Why did we not achieve it? What can we do better? And be honest about the learning here versus kind of hiding behind, oh, we didn't achieve it because it's an excuse. So this is hard because I don't think anybody really likes to admit to this.
It goes a little bit against our nature, isn't it? To show our vulnerability.
It totally does. So I think it's a good question to ask. And I think it's, again, going back to the mindset of the team of saying, okay, how honest are we going to be with each other here? I guess every team is a little bit different, but I would encourage the honest step back.
Mm-hmm.
I think it forces a lot of that self-awareness, doesn't it? Which I think can be difficult for people to do, but I think it just really, I think you're just asking a different question that will invoke a different emotion. And I think it's actually important to have that conversation.
Mm-hmm. I think another point I was going to add is I think the leaders can lead by example, by being super open about their challenges and their frustrations. And then I think it encourages their team members to do the same, because I think if you don't see it in your senior leadership, you could be afraid to be super vulnerable. So I think if they lead by example, you feel a lot more comfortable in doing that. And it's almost this microculture that they're creating where it's okay to recognize that we did fall short.
Yeah.
I think that's an excellent point.
The next question I was going to touch on, I think, is actually a really exciting one, because I think it actually gets into the realm of like prediction, but also supports the mindset of like being agile, or just because a year is ending doesn't mean that the strategy ends and you have to create a new one. It actually forces this mindset of the world keeps moving and so does our strategy. So why don't you set us up there, Davina, with the next question?
Of course. I think I probably echo your point that it is super exciting. I also think this is where teams can get super visionary. And I think the question really focuses on looking at what trends or opportunities that could arise in the following year. And that's based on your experience this year, of course, but also what you foresee, what you think will happen in the world. As you said, the world doesn't stand still. And we could look at industry trends. You could look at emerging technologies, also emerging markets. That's a recent one that I've been speaking about with some customers. Is different markets geographically are in different places, but that doesn't mean that we can't look to other territories for inspiration, right? Or even cross-industry inspiration. We need to look at shifting consumer behaviors, or even what competitors are doing. And when you take all of that and you take stock, what do you think is going to happen when you think about your business lens? And you've got to consider the risks, but also opportunities. And I think another piece of guidance here when you think about this question is the more stakeholders or the teams that you involve in this conversation, you start to create a richer view of that forward-looking perspective. And that's where also I think there's this beauty of having a diverse team and a diverse workforce, is that everyone thinks slightly differently about this. And everyone will have different takes on where they think the world will be in a year's time. And I think that's actually a beautiful thing. And it also starts to move away from kind of this holding on to the past as well, which I also see some businesses do. And kind of really, really holding on to the past events, what didn't go well. Let's be forward looking. How do we change things? And I also think, I know we mentioned that this is definitely focused towards a year end or a period end, but tomorrow is also a new day, right? And you could think about what tomorrow could bring and make it a different day to today as well.
Yeah. I like that. And you know what you just reminded me of actually is like some of the most incredible leaders that I've worked for actually go and get out on the shop floor. They go and immerse themselves with the consumer or the customer. And I think that's really important because actually, just because you're a leader and you sit in HQ or head office, you might not actually be able to foresee those things because you're not out in the wild,
Right. On the
if you
front
like. And
line.
so, yeah, on the
Yeah.
front line, and those front line people also have an opinion and can also have a
Of
wealth of
course.
knowledge that you can tap into. So I think driving that inclusivity across the business of
Mm,
different opinions and gathering those insights, I think can
mm.
also be part of that reflection.
Reminds me of Undercover Boss. You know, when the CEOs come down to like the McDonald's stores or and actually serve customers. But I love
Yeah.
that. I think you've got to also do something different to spark inspiration, I think. And unfortunately, that's not going to come from sitting at a desk in your office cubicle.
Definitely.
I would also
Definitely.
say, like, I mean, for this question, this is a big question, right? Like, this is not something that you sit down with your team in an hour and you have the answer, right? This is probably a process you're going through. You're collecting data, you're collecting information. You might go out to your stores or just talk to your customers and then gather information maybe from team members. And then you have a session. And again, either somebody facilitates it for you or you have someone in your team who helps facilitate it. But it's like a session almost in itself. But it's so valuable because it really helps you to actually also get that external view in and the view from all of your employees, or not all, but maybe some key employees. So I'd say the importance and the weight of the question is like heavy enough to not brush over it and just like, oh, we'll just add this on as a quick topic on our agenda, which sometimes happens too, but make it a dedicated session, probably together with the next question that we have in store here.
Yes. Why
What's
don't we
our
talk about
next
this?
question? Yeah.
The final question,
Final
which
fifth question.
which is interesting because you kind of, I think this is not a question. How do I put it? This is like, it's both a question, but also I imagine this has already been answered before you even like tackle the first four. And that is, what are our priorities for the coming year? And I imagine for most organizations, it's already being well thought out. You know, we're sort of coming up to the end of December or mid to end of December, probably already have those priorities figured out. But this is about turning that reflection into action. And I think it's kind of on purpose that this is question 5, because ideally you have the answers to the other questions first. But I think this is the comfort zone, isn't it? This is the comfort zone of a lot of businesses, is we don't do any of the reflection and we just go in with the priorities. But are they truly the priorities? I don't know. Maybe you need that reflection to also challenge that. What do you think?
Right. I also think it can change, right? Maybe you have a strategy planning session maybe at the end of Q3 or in Q3, and there's 3 whole months left of that year, and something might have happened in the world. It means you need to reassess, or a competitor's done something crazy. That means you need to reassess. And I think you shouldn't be afraid, like you said, to almost challenge your previous thinking when you've done that true reflection exercise.
Yeah. And I think
Definitely.
it's what I often see is kind of like going a little bit the easy route of like, oh, we're just going to take what we did this year or the last 2 years or the last 3 years. This is still true. And I'm not saying it's wrong, because oftentimes it might be the right way to go, but I would always challenge like going with the same priorities or like changing the priorities, like base it on like some true insights or some true reflection versus just kind of like keeping it easy. And that's an easy way to consolidate what the organization is doing. So again, I think there's always the easy way and there's always maybe the harder way. And oftentimes the harder way is the right way. But it takes more time, it takes more dedication, takes more reflection. And often, and I think we talked about it before, it's also where does your leadership stand with looking at the priorities and looking at the business this way? Maybe resources need to be reallocated, or you can just do it in a smarter way. Having that constant view on it is just so valuable.
Yeah, I agree. So how do we put this into practice then? I guess like you can ask yourself the question, but you should also schedule that dedicated time with your team, like not rush the process. Actually, you know, get an afternoon or even that full team retreat of people together, and actually get these questions answered from a diverse range of people. But what else should we be doing?
I think you've got to look at data, right? A lot of people will kind of have an idea or gut feeling, or they have an inkling, But let's look at the data. Let's look at what the facts are telling us about the previous year and also what the markets are predicting. And then I think using that as a true basis for your reflection is important as well.
Yeah, and then coming back to what I said earlier as well, I think you can kind of reflect on different levels and bring it together, maybe in one big session or in one big, maybe it's not a day or 2 days, but I do think it's like the strategy itself that's being reflected, and that's obviously being reflected on an ongoing basis, which is more about your business. But then it's also the processes where you would probably talk a bit more about what worked, what didn't work. And then you talk about the people and their engagement, and that's like gather their information. How do they actually feel about your strategy, about what you're working on? So I think a good year-end reflection takes a little bit of time and planning it almost to get all the data and the information in and then facilitate a session and make it really outcome focused. But I think there's also then always the way to do like the fast track potentially, which I think many teams do as well. I guess it's more how effective is it at the end of the day. One thing I was going to add is what I did with an organization the other day, and I think that was good too, just to go a little bit more into the mindset. We did more of a kind of process reflection in many ways, and we ended the session on what is their personal commitment as a leader. It was the leadership team as a leader to their team and their colleagues for the next year. So everybody came up with a commitment, and it was quite interesting because it really touched on all those key elements. And it was amazing to see how they came up with it by themselves, and how everybody was also just like agreeing to it. And we wrote them all down. We documented those commitments. So there's an opportunity to go back to those as well and review them later. But it felt like a powerful exercise as well. Just if you're looking just at a session with your leadership team, that would be something I would recommend to do to kind of connect a little bit the personal mindset, leadership style with the business as well.
I love that. It brings accountability too when you make it personal, right? So I love that. It's great.
I love that.
Yeah. So maybe we repeat our key 5 questions so that everybody remembers what we talked about.
Absolutely.
I think for me, I found this like incredibly inspiring as a leader. I'm definitely going to do this with our team here at Cascade. I think not letting it slip by, just really taking that time to reflect on where we've been, where we are currently, and where we want to go. And I think these 5 questions I feel are going to be really transformative, especially, I feel quite powerful around the commitment going into the new year. So I think to recap, they were, what are the biggest wins? What are the biggest challenges? Where did we fall short on our goals? What trends or opportunities should we pay attention to? And then finally, what are our priorities for the coming year?
Amazing. So maybe I love this topic, and it's a great topic to end the year with, I guess. I'm just going to share a quick personal update because you might not hear that much from me anymore in the next couple of months or so.
So sad.
I know, as I will move on to a mat leave and take care of a tiny human for a while. And not so much about the strategy, but follow me on LinkedIn and connect with me there. I will see what I can post in the meanwhile and share some thoughts or ideas. Who knows what creativity comes up as I'm taking care of a tiny little human as well.
Thanks, Miriam. You'll be very missed.
Thank you,
and
Miriam.
We can't wait for when you come back and do a reflection on the time out that you've had.
Yes.
What might be an interesting one
for newborns.
Exactly.
Thank you, Miriam.
Well,
thanks for everything.
Thank you so much. I think that wraps up today's episode. Hopefully you found it insightful. Obviously very sad to see you go, Miriam, but you'll be back before we know it. Exactly. And hopefully this podcast will help you on your journey to better strategy execution. Don't skip the end of year reflection, I think is the key takeaway from today.
So make sure to tune in to next week when we'll be talking about another exciting topic. It's going to be a great episode filled with lots of practical tips, so you don't want to miss this.
And in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe to the Ultimate Strategy Podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. Also, check out the link to our website that we mentioned at the beginning. And a big thank you to our sponsor, Cascade, for making this podcast possible.
And if you like what you heard, then like the episode, leave a comment, share it with your colleagues, your teams. We'd love to spread the podcast and would love to have more listeners like yourself. So thank you again for listening. And remember, great strategies are only as good as their execution.
So take action, make it happen, and see the results. See you in the next episode for your weekly dose of strategy.